Right, a huge, big British political story brewing just before we started recording Newscast at tea time. Kim Leadbeater, Labour backbench MP, sister of Joe Cox, who was murdered during the Brexit referendum. She came first in the ballot for private members' bills, which normally, as political reporters, we're interested in because it shows you what MPs want to try and change in the law. But we know that normally they don't get anywhere because they only get somewhere if the government of the day decides to back the private members bill and make time for it in Parliament. Now, Kim Leadbeater has tonight said that her private members bill would be some form of assisted dying for people who were terminally ill and at the end of their lives and wanted medical help to end their lives. She says that's going to be her private members bill. She's top of the ballot, which means she will be the first private members bill that gets discussed in Parliament. What happens then?
Well, then we have quite a debate. I mean, quite a national conversation, really, about this massive issue that Parliament last looked at best part of 10 years ago, and it was overwhelmingly or substantially rejected. The key thing in this debate to come, because it's seen as a conscience issue, is that MPs will be able to vote how they choose. They won't be told by their parties. They won't be whipped, to use the Westminster vernacular, in terms of how they vote. Now, and therefore, we've got to be honest about how little we know about how people might vote because there's so many new MPs and we haven't asked them all. But the view of Kim Leadbeater and others who have tried to canvass opinion is that they think Parliament's view has changed substantially since, I think it was 2016, 2015. Since then, I mean, not least because Parliament has changed substantially since then, and that there is a sense that there might be a view now that it is something that Parliament might like to take on and might like to legislate on. And other countries have gone down this track. And so, yeah, it's going to be quite a conversation, I think, because you will see all sorts of different views within different parties. I mean, I saw it in the Conservative contest in the last few days in Birmingham, where you had Kemi Badenoch saying that she is personally sympathetic to the idea, but wonders about the construction of the law. Yeah, you had others. I think it was Tom Tugendhat saying he was very sceptical about it. It's just two random sort of examples there. But it's going to come along. There's going to be space for it. The Prime Minister had promised Esther Rantzen, who is terminally ill, that this is something he would grip as Prime Minister. The curious political twist tonight is that Simon Case, who is the outgoing Cabinet Secretary, the most senior civil servant in the country, has written to ministers saying that the government will be neutral. So the government will not have a view. Now, individual ministers may have views that are already publicly known, which they don't have to sort of resile from, but they're not going to be taking a position as a minister. It would be a position as a individual. And so, yeah, this discussion's going to start, and it's going to be quite, I think, a big and profound conversation about what, as a society, we're willing to do.
And Alex, ministers will find it quite hard in interviews when this rolls around to remain neutral and reflect the government's position if it's very clear what they've personally said in the past.
Yeah, so collective responsibility is the term that's used, that when you're in government, you've got to go with the government on stuff. And in this case, effectively, that's being lifted on this issue. So they're not going to have to stick to the government position because the government is neutral on it. So I think what they're going to have to do is make a clear separation between when they're speaking as a minister on behalf of government, which on this issue is going to be a position of neutrality, and when they're speaking in a personal capacity on this specific issue, which they're going to be allowed to do. But it is quite interesting that Keir Starmer, because the thing with private members' bills, because normally it's only ministers that can bring forward legislation which then might make it into law, and this system allows any MP to do it. But as you say, the hold-up normally is that time is limited because there's a certain number of Fridays when these things get debated. It's interesting that Keir Starmer's said he will definitely allow time for this to happen, because I think speaking to people across the House of Commons about this over the last, and I mean, of course, there's a lot of new MPs, but in the run-up to the election and subsequently, even though there is a real divergence of opinion on the issue, I think a lot of people, whatever their view, recognise it's time to have another conversation about it, a kind of public debate about it, because it's an issue of such huge significance. Many say it describe it as an issue of conscience. And of course, for many, many individuals, families and individuals will have very, very strong personal views on this, perhaps because of their own personal experience points as well. So I think the reason that it's been made so clear that the government wants to allow this proper time, but they're not going to take a position, is because there is a recognition of the magnitude of the moment on an issue that could have such profound consequences for so many people.
I think what sort of slightly freaks me out, is putting too strongly, is just how the British unwritten constitution works, that we could end up with this massive change to the law that would be like a generational thing. But it started with the ballot for who gets to propose the private members' bills, which is some numbered balls being pulled out of a goldfish bowl in a room in the House of Parliament. It's just quite a bizarre way of doing things, or the perfect way of doing things, depending on your view of our unwritten constitution.
But I guess underneath that sort of first layer of what some might see as absurdity is, it wouldn't happen without the government creating the space.
Yes. No. So it's not. This is not random.
It's not entirely
this is not random.
Because it was also made very clear before the private member bills, the conversation was active, that if somebody who'd been pulled out of the ballot came forward with this, then it would become. And as I come back to that point, a lot of people have said we think it's time to have the debate.
And numerically, there was a greater statistical likelihood of Labour MPs coming up near the top of that ballot, given the number of them. Now, that's not to say they would necessarily share the view of some that this is time for this kind of debate, but it's the desire from the government to see this debated that is the biggest factor in leading us towards this debate happening and the potential for the law to change.
Newscast from the BBC.